estimating. Part art, part science, kind of a pain in the neck. The beginning of success for every construction company is nailing your estimate. And that's what we're going to talk about here today on Construction Genius. My guest, Melvin Newman, he is the president of PataBid, and he knows what he's talking about. He has over 15 years of experience as an estimator and project manager in key aspects of construction and prefab in the mechanical, electrical, and general contracting industries. So the good news is Melvin knows what he's talking about, and you're going to pick that up right away as we dive into all things estimating. Enjoy this conversation. You really, really want to listen to the whole conversation. There's tons of great gems in here. One of the things I really like is talking about socializing an estimate in your organization and really getting different parties involved in looking at a bid so that you can bring the creative genius of the whole organization to bear to an estimate so that you can increase your hit rate and win the right projects with the right clients and the right locations. This is going to be killer. Listen to this interview, enjoy it, share it with other people. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Melvin, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, please.
Born in Kenya, Africa, so that's one that throws people for a loop. But started my career in construction in Eastern Canada, working as a project manager. I like to say I worked my way up into estimating because it was on the second floor of the company that I was working for at the time. And spent about 15 years working in construction estimating. So that's been an absolutely fascinating experience. And during that time, really, when I started estimating, my first day in estimating, the chief estimator walks over to my desk, drops about 50 pages of takeoff, a red book all-pricer, an NAPHCC labor manual, a calculator and pencil, and he says, "Your job is to extend this." And I'm looking at this and I'm like, dude, it's like 2010 or 2008. I'm like, what are we doing here? Computers have been around for a long time. And he looked at me, he's like, "You think you can do better?" I'm like, okay, at the risk of sounding really arrogant, I'm a 21-year-old, but I think this could be better. And this guy was absolutely brilliant when it came to construction, but the technology was not the strong suite. And so really got introduced to what could be done in construction at that moment. Stayed in estimating, like I said, up until basically last year. But in that entire time, my focus has been on let's try to bring technology, especially into estimating. Let's try to change the game there.
Let me ask you, what attracted you to estimating specifically, having started in project management?
To be fully transparent, I am not a fighter. I'm not the kind of guy that likes to walk in and yell and scream at, the client, the suppliers, everybody all at once. It was necessary. Did a really good job at it, just didn't enjoy it. So estimating, on the estimating side, everyone's your friend. They want to get carried. But then, once you get awarded the job, everything changes. So yeah. We all know how that game is played. And estimating is a fascinating statistics game. It's all numbers. And I love crunching numbers, big data. When I was in high school, I wanted to go through for software, that sort of thing, but went through the dot-com bubble. My dad was a mechanical engineer, went to him, and he's like, "Well, son, they're always going to need to build things." So went into construction, but brought a lot of that software tech desire and ambition with it. But yeah, in estimating specifically the stats, the data, like what you can do to refine an estimate and the whole strategy. Like you're talking the art of war in a microcosm. And that was what drew me in.
Let's talk about that a little bit then. Tell me, as you look at an estimate, and this may vary from project to project, but what are the key statistics that you're looking at, the key data points that you're looking at that can help you to get insights into your strategy?
Oh, awesome question. First thing you do, open the front end. Especially if you're in one of the trades. So most like one of the what I call the complex trades. So mechanical, electrical, fire protection. Your first step, you have to open that front end. And a lot of companies, this is where they screw up. They think, oh, I'm going to skip right to Division 25, Division 26. I'm going to go right to my spec. No, you've got to actually read the very front end, the tender, find out what the schedule is. The number of projects I've bid where a sub to me just totally skipped over the schedule, and I'm talking to an earth mover, and I'm like, dude, this is happening in January, and this is Canada. You're not going to actually be digging this without, some major equipment here to break up the frost. So that first thing is the schedule. Second thing.
So it sounds like you're talking there about kind of getting a feel for the project. Is that what you're saying?
100%. Before you do any sort of takeoff, go through the documents, flip the drawings. One of my favorite tasks with my estimating teams was always whenever a new tender opportunity came in, we would lay the drawings out either on the screen or, heaven forbid, paper. But lay the drawings out and literally gather everyone, the admin assistants, anybody who was walking by, do a drawing flip, and everybody would then write down on a sticky note what they thought the project was worth and put that up on a board. And then at the end of the day, whoever was closest to that would get a drink. If we won it, it might be some nice drink. If we didn't win it, it was a bottle of water. So that's kind of the get engaged, understand the project, understand a lot of the key front end risks before you even start to put any sort of takeoff in, because the thing that people don't necessarily realize is every problem on that project, from health and safety through to financial, is committed to in that first estimate. So if you don't understand that, diving right in, you can set up your company for a world of hurt.
It's interesting what you were saying there is that you would sort of socialize the estimate with all people who might be involved in helping out putting the estimate together. Is that right?
100%. And even not necessarily putting the estimate together, it's always best to get as many eyes on it. You never know what somebody's going to see. You never know what somebody's feeling is going to be. And yes, at the end of the day, the PM is responsible for that estimate. But if you engage everyone on it, that esprit de corps, the team environment, and all of this is to build towards that day of closing. Because we all know day of closing is the utter gong show. It doesn't really matter what you've done strategically. Something always goes wrong on the day of closing. So if you've got the team involved, it makes that far easier.
Why do you think some companies struggle to get the team involved?
Okay, in personal experience working with a number of different companies, not a lot of companies actually realize it's a team. There is a tremendous amount of us and them in construction, especially when it comes to estimating. The project execution group tends to view the estimators as inexperienced, and this is actually a whole nother thing. A lot of companies put the junior people in estimating first. That I feel is an abject disaster. But they see a lot of, when something succeeds, it's got to be the project execution team. When something fails, it's got to be the estimating team. And there's a lot of conflict that can arise from that. And if that's not nipped early and taken out, that can build a culture that's very poisonous to building a good estimating environment. Okay,
so we've got you open the front end, you start socializing the project, socializing the plans. What are some of those, as you open up the front end, what are the schedule obviously is something that you have to take into account, the physical location like you were mentioning there. What are some of the other things that you're really looking for to make sure that you have a good understanding of as you're putting your number together?
Access. That's a huge one. Simply getting to the work phase. I mean, if you're doing residential, typically access is not a problem. It can be if you're walking into a major developer that's doing like a whole neighborhood at once,
Yep.
That's a consideration. When you're walking into those neighborhoods, time of year is huge. If it's going to be all a mud bath while you're trying to get to your house that you're building, that's a challenge. If you're doing a high rise, you're doing a 68-story high rise building. And I bid one of these, the tallest building I've bid in my life was 68 stories in Edmonton. The company that won it, unfortunately, hadn't built anything over 10 stories before. And getting to that work face, the first 5 stories are going to go brilliantly. By the time you get to when we actually worked it out, I worked with a phenomenal team of people out of Toronto who had been in construction for decades. And when we sat down and we looked at this, it's like, okay, by the time you break the 10th story, I mean, MCA, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Mechanical Contractor Association of America. Yeah. They publish actual documents on factors that you have to account for when you're going up. When you get to floor 68, your productivity is going to be like 2 to 3 hours a day at best. And you've got to get materials there. And all of that material is coming after hours because these buildings are being built downtown. You never have access. The crane is booked 100% of the time from like 6 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. at night by the concrete guys. And so your material is being delivered to the floors at 2 in the morning. And so these are all massive risks that aren't even necessarily detailed. And that's where going back to socializing the estimate is huge, because somebody in your company has experienced this before. It doesn't really matter actually what size your company is. If your company is really small, maybe don't dive into a 68-story building initially. Right. But outside of that, somebody has done this before in your company. Find them.
That's excellent. It's so interesting to think about because, you're looking at a 68-story building and you think, well, one floor is just like the next, but the higher you go up, the more the dynamics change. Simply
riding the man lift, because the elevators aren't working. When you're building this thing, the elevators aren't working. And if you're lucky, the GC has put 2 man lifts on the building. More often than not, they've only put 1. And by the time you get to your work face, you can spend an hour and a half just riding that man lift up. So I mean, and all of these, it's fascinating. We all like to talk about the massive projects, but it doesn't actually matter. You could be building one small residential house as an owner-operator. The scale of the risk of access is actually the same. Sure, the raw value, if you screw up on the job, it might, if you're an electrical guy, if you're the GC, it might impact you to $100,000. Whereas the guy who screws up on that 68 story, that's $100 million.
Right.
But if you actually look at the percentages, they're invariably within the same window. And so it doesn't matter the size of your company. You have to consider this when you walk into the estimate. And this is something where I struggle with a lot of the trade schools in North America. They don't teach people coming out of the trade schools even what these terms are. Right. So you get these electricians, you get these concrete guys, you get everybody coming out of these trade schools, and they're incredibly good at their job. They know exactly what they're doing for the install, but then they want to go start a company. And that's where they end up in a lot of hurt, because we don't teach these people what these risks are.
Okay.
So yeah, that's so access, liquidated damages, what's the impact on the schedule, those sort of things.
Yep. So then where do people waste time when it comes to estimating?
My favorite term, the time inversion.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So when you're doing an estimate, you have to do the quantity survey, right? Like you've got to count everything. And this is especially relevant, again, to those complex trades, the mechanical, electrical, fire protection, building automation guys. Building automation guys actually have it particularly rough because they're not even given a design. Everything they're installing is proprietary. They've got to go, make it up on the fly in the 2 weeks they have to bid it. But let's say you're the electrical contractor. You've got to go count everything on that project. And you've got, like, if you look around your room, you can see, you got a plug. Beauty. What you see is a faceplate and something you plug into, but behind that, there's a box. There's screws. There's wire. There's connectors. All of that has to be accounted for. Electrical is actually the worst trade when it comes to this level of complexity. And so then you've got, you go through, and I ran the analysis on this because I started out in an MEP company, a company that specialized in mechanical, electrical, plumbing. I ran an analysis on the estimates that we were producing there and realized that 85 to 90% of the time we spent on those estimates was counting widgets.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, when I took all of that in on a project where we were buying the equipment, buying the pieces out, everything that we had counted was only worth 25 to 30% of the job. I'm like, wow, we're spending, 80 to 90% of our time estimating on really the not high value aspects of this. You have to do it. Like, you actually have to go through and quantify these things. But we've got to find a better way to do that. And that's really where the inception for PataBid came from. What we do is to try to develop the technology to invert that time inversion, so that 80 to 90% of the quantity survey time that you're spending can be reduced to maybe 30 to 50% of the estimate. And now you can go out and negotiate those packages better. You can talk to your sub trades. You can actually go meet them because you have time, and you can take the schedule to them and get a common understanding of what the work involves.
So let's talk about that, because it's interesting. Because the idea that the takeoff and understanding the drawings, that can be a very technical thing, but it's also a very intuitive thing. But you bring up something very interesting, that if I can claim back some time, then I can do a better job communicating with other subs and with other trades, so that I can actually get a more accurate estimate. So tell me how that time inversion impacts the hit rate of a contractor in terms of winning work.
Absolutely excellent question. I mean, when you're literally just throwing time out the window, when it comes down to that closeout, now everything at the end of the day in the estimate revolves around that closeout.
Mm-hmm.
You will not have the time to properly ascertain the risks, to properly understand all the quotes that are coming in, to prep for all of that. And it will fall apart. I've watched it happen many times. And then the thing that really kills is when you have two awesome opportunities come in.
Mm-hmm.
Now what? You simply don't have the time to commit to that takeoff in parallel. And what invariably happens with a lot of contractors is they'll try, and they end up doing a crap job on all of them, and it comes to nothing. And now your hit rate trends to zero.
No, go ahead.
I get really excited about this.
Please, no, go. I want you to go. Go. No, you're good. Go.
You're talking to probably one of the craziest guys in construction who absolutely loves estimating because of all of this. But yeah, if you don't have that time to properly tackle multiple estimates coming in, and we're in a time period where construction is actually, flourishing. It's incredibly difficult. Yeah. We've got massive supply chain issues still. We've got ongoing labor issues, insane labor issues. But the actual projects aren't stopping. So you will get multiple requests for quotes, and our clients that we deal with on a day-to-day are telling us this. Like, they get multiple opportunities to bid. How do they choose? And so if we can't fix that time inversion, your hit rate is just going to suffer for that, and the jobs that you win are going to have a subpar estimate done, and that is incredibly dangerous from a corporate level.
I just pictured that, so you've committed to an estimate, and it's maybe not the cherry project that you're looking for, and then all of a sudden another project comes on your radar, but you can't do it because you've already sunk time and effort into that one, and you can't flip the switch and take that one on as well because you just don't have the time.
If two show up on the same day, that's actually a golden opportunity. That never happens. Because what always happens is like you said, a less than optimal one shows up, and you work a week on it. You're 30% into its 3-week bid period, and then another one lands, and it's for your A-team client. It's an A-grade project, but the problem is you can't ditch the other one because you've got relationships built on that.
Yes.
And now you've got this relationship that you end up in two must-bid situations.
Interesting.
And you don't, and they'll both invariably close within a day or two of each other. So, yeah.
Tell me, as in your career as an estimator, how did you build and maintain relationships with your project partners in terms of negotiating the different packages and negotiating the different aspects of an estimate so that you could, on the one hand, get the best number for yourself, but on the other hand, support your project partners and build that mutually beneficial relationship?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It was a bit of a development. So initially in my career, as you know, that young upstart who really should have kept more quiet so people didn't know I was a young upstart.
Yeah, right.
Instead, I opened my mouth too often. It developed over time. So what I found works really well is get ahead of your partners. Get as far ahead of them as you can. Now, I had a tremendously far-sighted and brilliant manager out of Ottawa. His name was Tony Dolan when I started my career, and he taught me that on the execution side. Yes, we were the mechanical electrical trade. We should know more than the engineer on the project.
Ooh, that's
That
good.
is how you build out and get ahead of everything. So I took that very seriously and moved it into, okay, in the estimating, how do we get ahead of the GC? How do we get ahead of all of our partners so that we can come to them not necessarily with the problems on the job, but the problems and the solution?
Mm-hmm.
And a solution that is in our best interests for the price. So what I found really advantageous, this was where one of the parts of PataBid came out. The very first part was simply to find bid opportunities. A completely autonomous platform that runs itself, built on NLP AI. If you want to go down a black hole, I can take you there. But basically what it does, what it started out was to just bring me all of the bid opportunities happening in North America every single day.
Right.
And from there, use the AI to filter everything down to exactly what I was looking for. That turned out to be incredibly powerful because I could see an opportunity before my team members, my future team members, business development people had even seen it. And so I would call up the estimator at, a GC I wanted to work with and say, hey, this project just came out. Do you want to work together? Can we set up a meeting, in 3 or 4 days to talk about the schedule? Because I'm going to know about the schedule by then. Because I'm going to read that, the day of. And I would oftentimes get the whole like, oh my gosh, we heard this project was coming. We had no idea it was out. I'm like, yeah, it came out yesterday. Let's work on this together. And that would immediately build, again, socializing that estimate, right? Like both internally and externally. And that immediately builds a team playing environment. And yes, you're putting yourself a bit at risk because you never know what these people are going to do, but you want to work with your partners on the project.
Yep.
And I found that worked tremendously well to get ahead of all of the information. And then, of course, collect all the stats on it. It's a fantastic amount to understand, like, okay, I can see this GC bids on XYZ all the time. So when that comes out, I'm going to go talk to that guy. Yep. I can see that their competitors bid on ABC and sometimes Z. Well, now, maybe the competitor wants to get more of Y. Now I can actually go and start to pitch this to them as the unassuming little subtrade.
Sure.
But when you start to do that, you build that environment where you can take over.
Yeah, it's interesting how you can set yourself apart with the timeliness of the information that you have.
100%. Knowledge is power. At the end of the day, like there's that old adage, knowledge is power.
Yep.
Sharing knowledge is incredibly powerful.
Yep.
So if you can get ahead of this, understand the risks before you even call up, because you can find these, 2 to 3 days before the GC finds it. The GC will then, navigate through all their own internal processes. So it'll be at least a week and a half before they'll even send out the invites to their subtrades. So if you are that subtrade, now you are way ahead of your competition. You are way ahead of the game. You're playing at a new table there, and you can start to control that narrative. And
I think it's interesting.
That is a huge advantage.
No, it's great. I think when you said knowledge is power, I think it's important to explore that because when you're talking about this idea of coming to a GC with information on a project that they perhaps don't know about, you establish credibility, you establish authority, you establish trust. So that knowledge is power. Take a deeper dive into that. If you're coming to the table with knowledge that they don't have, it can set you apart from your competition in a tremendous way.
100%. And then when you have identified those risks already, when you have identified strategic advantages, sharing strategic advantages, always a double-edged sword.
Right.
But obviously, if you're working in that collaborative environment, a tremendous advantage. And then, knowing more about what your competitors are doing, understanding and monitoring what they're doing on the whole market. Now you can start to drill in and see, okay, I know that I can win here. And this goes back to what we said kind of at the beginning, of course, that time inversion issue. It starts right at the front end. How do you identify actually something worth spending your time on?
That's very good.
And sometimes that question is a moot question because you have to do it for a relationship.
Yes.
Sure.
Yep.
That is one aspect of it. But if you're shotgunning estimates out, you're doing it wrong. You need to understand where your competitive edge is, where your relationships actually lie. And again, we did this analysis one time for one of the companies I worked for and realized that some of the clients that our project execution team hated the most, could not stand to work with, actually paid their bills on time, actually were, giving us work. Yes, they put us through the meat grinder, but they were actually financially and business-wise fantastic clients. The ones that we enjoyed working with the best, we never got money from them.
Interesting.
It was a fascinating one where when we did this, because a bunch of our execution team was screaming to let go of some clients. Yep. And we came back and we're like, actually, we need to do more with them. Yep. They are our bread and butter. And that all came back to that data and knowledge, running those analytics, understanding where our market was and what we were actually doing. Drove our execution team around the bend. I did feel for them in the end, but
it's interesting, really well. Huh? Yeah, you have to identify what a good client is, because they may put you through the meat grinder, but if they pay on time, that's tremendously beneficial. Let me ask you, one of the great struggles that a lot of companies have is the plans that they get to estimate on are either inaccurate or they change by the time the project is getting built. And when I say inaccurate, I mean maybe they're not even detailed enough. So how, in your experience, do you bridge the gap between the plans that you have that you're estimating on, and you're looking at the plan and it says this, but I really know in this circumstance this is what's going to happen. How do you as an estimator make those leaps from concept to reality?
Your biggest tool in there is your risk register. And this is something that I learned from the general contracting side of things, that general contractors do very well and quite frankly need to teach their subcontractors to do. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're the drywaller, if you're the concrete guy, if you're the earth mover, if you're the MEP trades, maintain a risk register for every single project. And
explain that for me, because I'm a dummy. Tell me what you mean by a risk register.
So a risk register is basically an Excel sheet. It's a table.
Yep.
You put in what you've identified as your risk. So schedule, taking place in the winter. Yep. Schedule is incredibly compressed. Drawings, as you mentioned, zero detail.
Right.
Client, difficult.
Right.
And then you put to this, okay, what's this worth? What is the adder to do this in the winter that I identify? Is this $100,000 extra dollars because I now have to get a much bigger JD, excavator in? Yep. Is this, the compressed schedule? Do I have to run a night crew? What is the adder and lost productivity on that? And then you go down that list, and this is, again, where you want to socialize this. You want to bring in your superintendents. You want to bring in your PMs. And once you've done this as the estimator, you want to show up with what you think the monetary values are of these and pre-populate it. And then you have a discussion, a back and forth on what's the probability of this actually happening. Is the probability that we're going to run a night crew 100%? Or will we only have to put that night crew on for the latter half of the project? Because you all know, especially if you're in one of those later trades like drywalling or floor finishing, you're compressed to the end of the schedule. And it doesn't actually matter what you do. The floor and the foundation aren't there. You're not starting early.
Yes.
So you play that back and forth with the whole team of, okay, what's the probability of this going ahead? And then it's really just simply the value multiplied by the probability, and that gives you a dollar amount at the end.
Yes.
And you want to put that into your risk bucket at the end of the sheet. And you want to put that at the very end of your estimate as your risk allowance. And then you want to put that in a completely separate bank account that only the CEO can actually release to your project team. And you want to really try to make sure that your project team is either really good or doesn't know about it, because they cannot depend on it. The goal is obviously not to use that bucket if at all possible. And then, but invariably it will have to be tapped into. There are unforeseen changes.
Yep.
Some can be accounted for, some cannot be. So you may have to tap into that, but that is what the risk register is there to do. And it goes back to socializing that estimate.
Okay, so let me ask you, I'm the CEO of a commercial construction company, and I have my estimating team, I have my project management team. The goal of the estimator is to land work, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means I put a number in that is not necessarily creative, but it's a tough number.
Interpreted.
I know, and I know it's going to be tough for my project team to hit. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I land a job, the project team looks at what I've bid and the schedule and all that kind of stuff. And they immediately begin to have some bad feelings, so to speak, towards the estimating team. There's a challenge there. So as the CEO of the company, give us some advice to manage that dynamic and that potential tension between your estimating and project teams.
So one of the best things to do there is feedback from the execution team. And this is something that I stipulated, if any PM was to come upstairs and talk to my team, they had better show up with the negative and a positive.
Very good.
Because there's no way that every job is only negative. We'd be out of business. We're doing something horribly wrong if every job is only negative. So if you're going to show up upstairs, yes, maybe an estimator missed something. Maybe they miscalculated something. We need to know that so that we don't replicate that. But equally important is we need to know where we doubled down. Like if we just cover all the risk, let's say, we're never going to win a job.
Right.
Because every single job also comes with benefits.
Yes.
So where did we improve? Okay, so you used a slightly different technique to install this way. I need to know what the benefit of that was, because we've got a job over here where we're putting 10 of those in.
Yep.
And you say that you actually beat the labor by 5 to 8% on that. Awesome. Yeah, we didn't carry anywhere near enough project management time, let's say. Great. That's good for us. But if we only carry that, we're actually going to screw ourselves on this, like winning the bid. We will be non-competitive because you haven't told us where we can also reduce the cost.
Yep.
So the risk register on two faces is both the risk, and I've used it in the past as a benefits. So you list all the risks at the top, and then at the bottom of you list all the benefits that you can anticipate. Okay, I'm going to buy my material because of my buying power. I'm going to reduce my costs here. One of my favorite ones was we were working on a project in Vancouver. I don't know if you know that area. Basically all on sand, major excavation project. We carried a substantial amount of risk on disposing of that sand. When they went to actually run the project, turns out that sand is actually highly valuable to all of some berry farmers. It was cranberries. There is a massive cranberry production in Vancouver area. There's a whole bunch of these farms that do this, and they begged for that sand. They actually made money selling the sand to the cranberry farmers on the project. It was a really interesting turn of events. But now knowing that, going to bid the next job in Vancouver, it's okay, we can actually sell this now. That's going into the risk register. What do I think I can sell it for? What's the probability I can make it? okay, here's a positive number in that risk register now.
So that's really
and
interesting.
all of that gets turned over to the execution team. Yeah.
So interesting, because on every project, there's potentially new opportunities to mitigate against risk or to make money that come up that we may have never come across before. And that needs to be communicated and captured in order to be able to leverage that information for another opportunity in the future.
100%. One of my favorite projects with this exact thing was in Ottawa, Fleet Street Pumping Station. It's actually a heritage station. It was built in the 17 or 1800s, like way early on.
Wow.
It's entirely powered by run of river water. The pumps that pump potable water into Ottawa are directly coupled to turbines in the river. So the whole station uses almost no power. But we had a project the project came out, they wanted to replace the penstocks, I think it was, at the head end that fed the turbines that fed the water, blah, blah, blah. There was some massive 36-inch heavy steel pipe that had to go into the building. My mentor, the guy I mentioned at the beginning, one of the guys at the beginning of the discussion there who had dropped all the papers on my desk, he called me over and he's like, Melvin, what do you see here? How would you do this job? And I came up with this, fracoctus way of, getting stuff in. And he looks at me, he's like, no, we're going to do it in a tenth of that time. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you're nuts. And he went to the managers and he said, here's what we're going to carry on this project. And they said he was nuts. And he said, nope, well, this is what we're going to do. We close the job where we don't bid it this way. And we were like 25% low when we submitted the price. And everybody was losing their shirt on this guy, on everything. He said, nope, I'm going to go down to site on the day this pipe arrives. And so he left he was on site at like 6:30 in the morning on the day this happened. I'm sitting in the office. Manager comes to me. He's like, okay, Melvin. He's like, I'm going to head out to the site here and just see how bad this is going. He comes back at 1:00 in the afternoon and he just sits down beside me, my manager. And I'm like, how bad is it? He's like, they're done. It's in. It's completely finished. I'm like, what? I'm like, he had still carried a couple of days to get this pipe in. And he's like, yep, it is finished. They were eating lunch when I got there and they wouldn't tell me how they put it in. But we knew we could call the superintendent the next time we had a job like that.
That's
and
cool.
It ended up working out tremendously well. So again, you need to bring all of these people together. And if you are going to take that risk as the CEO, right, that's what you have to look at is, okay, do I trust my team enough to pull this off?
Yep.
And it's one thing when you make that decision consciously, that can work. If you make it unconsciously, you don't realize you left something out of the estimate. That's a whole different situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I would give one word of advice to the CEOs from a non-technical perspective, it's the relationship between your estimating team and your project team is usually a direct reflection of the quality of the relationship between your head of estimating and your head of operations. So if you're seeing a tremendous amount of conflict there, the first place you should look is the relationship between the head of estimating and the head of operations.
100%. Absolutely. You should also look at, where did your estimators come from? Like, were they just straight out of the field and never given, kind of an education on office politics, if you will? Where were they just junior people that you hired out of college?
Yes.
A lot of that can come from a fundamental misunderstanding of what estimating is. And yes, everybody looks
What
at...
is estimating? What is
estimating?
estimating?
Is educated guessing and imagination. It is, you have 3 weeks to commit to a job that's going to take you 3 years to build. And in those 3 weeks, you have to understand every aspect of that build. And you're committing to it. And a lot of project managers who strictly have done project managers you can say that, they can kind of empathize with it, but they don't really actually understand what that means. There is no late delivery of an estimate. If you're a week late on your project that's gone on for 3 years, nobody's even going to blink.
Yeah, right.
If you're a month late on it, nobody's going to blink. If
Right.
you're 2 months late, people are going to start to question things.
Sure.
If you are 1 second late on that delivery, you are out
Wow.
of the tender. Like, you are literally out of the running. They won't even open your envelope. They will hand it back to you.
Yep.
So there's a very different dichotomy there between these two sides. But you said it. Check the relationship of your head of ops and your head of estimating. That is a critical relationship.
Okay, so you described two different types of estimators there a minute ago. You talked about the junior person, and then you talked about the person who's coming out of the field. So the person coming out of the field into estimating, that's something that happens, and they have a tremendous amount of technical understanding and real world understanding. So what I'd like you to do is just give us, for that junior person, and then from that person who has experience, but it's field experience coming into estimating, what are 2 or 3 things that I want to emphasize when I'm developing a junior person, and then 2 or 3 things I want to emphasize when I'm working with someone with experience, but field experience coming into estimating?
Junior person, mentorship, 100% mentorship. Pair them with a senior person. Ensure that they work together. That junior person is going to come out of school with a lot of training, a lot of ideas. They're going to be enthusiastic, but they won't actually understand what they're doing. Take them to your fab shop. Take them to the site. Ask them to try to pick up that 4-inch valve there, or that piece of structural steel over there, or even just the machine to put the bolts in, the torque, the hydraulic torque wrench for your structural steel bolts. Ask them to pick that up. And when they try, tell them that's why when you're bidding this and it's over somebody's head, that's a major problem. And then strive to build in imagination. Imagination is absolutely critical for an estimator, because they have nothing else. They have nothing but imagination to understand how this works. That was something that my mentor did fantastically well. Like this gentleman who got the pipe in. Everything was imagination. And he would challenge me on that every single bid, every single day. How do you see this? And we were digging up nuclear contaminated pipe at Chalk River. How do you see this? How does this go? And it's like, I've never done that, and I don't want to be around when it happens. Right. But you still have to figure that out.
That's excellent.
So that's huge for the junior people, is to build in that imagination, build in that esprit de corps through the mentorship. Because estimating is awesome. People tend to underappreciate it. They want to get into project management. They want to get into something else, execution wise. There seems to be a lot of glam and glory there. Perhaps the reality is the estimator is a different person. Like, the estimator, when you're hiring that junior person, don't necessarily try to hire them from the perspective of a PM. Right. Try to hire an actual junior estimator that you can bring up to be the backbone of your estimating team. On the other side of that, the people coming out of the field. Yeah. That can be very challenging.
Yes.
What you have to instill in them is an understanding of the financials. Because what they've been doing is building very, very well. Yes. And they will know how to assemble things. But what they're used to is understanding every single nut and bolt that goes into the flange. They need to know that, because that's what they have to buy for the next day's work. When you're putting together a bid, that doesn't matter. You can actually make a blanket allowance for those bolts at the end of the day. What matters is that you get the pump that it's attaching to, that you get the columns that it's attaching to. That's what you have to understand at the estimating. So it's a much higher level. And that can be very challenging for somebody out of the field to identify and run with. The very best estimators I have ever seen in my life are tradesmen who have owned their own company. It doesn't matter if that company succeeded or failed. It literally doesn't matter. They fully appreciate and understand every aspect of the business side and the technical side. They are the unicorn.
That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. So that would lead me then in my recruiting efforts to be thinking about companies that have been around for a while, that maybe the guy is done with, you know, the drama and the signing away his life every time he does a project, and maybe he can come in
and his house.
Yes, yeah, and he can come in and not only give us some great contribution from his own estimating, but then also do some of that mentorship that you were talking about earlier.
100%. You want to find that person who has been doing, you know, who has been the tradesperson for 10 years, went and started their own company, ran that for maybe another 5-10 years. And like you said, the stress of that, it's incredibly stressful,
Yes.
Especially if they're still locked in at that, you know, capped out at 5 employees kind of thing.
That's beautiful.
And that's a person offered to buy their company straight up. They are worth that. You know, walk in and just say, look, man, we want you. You have what it takes. If maybe that company actually imploded. If you find out that this company's gone into receivership, walk in and say, hey, especially if you're a larger company, that can be a fairly low key if you're buying out an owner operator, and say, hey, I will absorb your debts there.
Yep.
You come work for me and you be the intelligence, because now you know better than anyone else in the world what it takes to do this. And that could be a very percentage-wise low-cost way of getting incredibly good talent into the front end of your business.
That's beautiful. I love that. So Melvin, you've been tremendously generous with your insights here. Tell us a little bit more about PataBid and what the company's all about.
So we are a construction tech company.
Mm-hmm.
We are all about automating that very front end of your construction process. We want to find all of the opportunities across North America to bid on, and then using our NLP AI, actually read, categorize those, bring the relevant ones to you. So my teams were spending upwards of 18 hours a week searching for opportunities across multiple people. Using this sort of NLP-based approach to it, we were able to bring that down to 20 minutes. Our clients, one of the double-edged swords of what we do, we walked into one GC that decided they were going to give us a shot, and they had 3 people dedicated only to finding opportunities to bid on. They didn't even run the risk analysis. All they did all day was check to see what they could potentially bid on. And so they came in and they're like, yeah, show us your stuff. We showed them our tenders platform, and they went through it and they're like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah, we'll buy 1 license right now and then we'll give it a shot. A couple weeks, we'll come back to you. So, 3 weeks later, I call them back and I'm like, hey, let's talk about these other licenses. And the guy's like, yeah, this is a little awkward. We moved those other people into estimating because now 1 person can do the job with your platform. And I'm like, that's awesome. But at the same time, it kind of sucks for me. I get it, but it's working. And then on the actual core estimating front, the quantity surveying, a lot of what we're doing on that is, yes, we're bringing in the AI there. So image segmentation, ripping apart the drawings for you autonomously, all of that. But one thing that we're running into, especially here in North America, we've dealt with some people overseas in Australia and New Zealand literally in the last few weeks. Construction here has really fallen off a cliff when it comes to the quality of those documents. You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I know.
I saw the drawings and stuff that are coming out of New Zealand and what they're actually mandating at the government levels for quality of documentation. Yep. Versus what we have here. And I had to tell the companies like out of New Zealand and Australia, I'm like, do not come to North America. You will not survive here. You don't actually, there's so much risk here because our documents come so severely incomplete.
Yes.
So the AI can only take you so far on that. So what we've built into our platform is full drafting capabilities.
Yes.
So as you're drafting, it's actually building out the estimate. So that contractor can go in, quickly draw some lines. It pulls in all the assemblies for them, builds out a full labor material costed estimate for them in minutes. They export that drawing, deliver it with their bid. And now that's a huge risk mitigator.
Why is your company called PataBid?
That's a throwback to I was born in Kenya. So Pata is actually Swahili for search, find, or get married to.
Interesting.
And that basically covers everything to do with construction. And my mom used to yell at my brother and I a lot on the schoolyard in Swahili, which was always hilarious to see who would put their head up when looking for the person yelling. And here comes my brother and I like, yep, no, it's us. We're being yelled at in Swahili.
That's great. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about Melvin. How can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about PataBid?
PataBid.com is our website. That's a good place to start. Our YouTube channel has a tremendous number of tutorial videos on our platform, our various different platforms. Take a look at that. See if that'll help you. Melvin@patabid.com is my email address. Absolutely feel free to reach out at any time. A core tenet of our business is if we can't help you, we want to find somebody who can.
That's awesome.
We really, really feel strongly that construction is in a point of change right now.
Yes.
And we want to help spearhead that.
That's great. Melvin, I really, really appreciate you coming on. Your insights have been tremendously helpful. I know I learned a ton. I know my audience learned a ton. So thanks for joining us here.
I'll climb off my box now. Thank you so much.
No, you're good, dude. You stay on that box. It's a good box to be on.
Thank you so much, Eric. This has been an absolute pleasure.
That's awesome. That was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed that. Learned a lot. And feel free to reach out to Melvin at patabid.com if you'd like to learn more about his company. Quick thing that I thought about was this. You know how we were talking earlier about the divisions between estimating and operations, the conflicts that can occur, and how that's often an indication of a broken relationship between your VP of Ops and your VP of Estimating. If you're sensing that kind of difficulty in your company, you're experiencing that, you may benefit from bringing an outside executive coach in to work with your senior executives. That's what I do all day, every day with my clients, is help them to understand those people conflicts that they have and build better relationships within the organization for the benefit of everyone involved in the company. So if you'd like to explore some of the executive coaching that I provide for my clients, see if it's a fit for your company, reach out to me at my website, constructiongenius.com/contact. Put your details into the form there. I'll put a link in the show notes, and then you can reach out to me and we'll have a quick chat about the executive coaching I offer and see if it's a fit for your company. So thanks again for listening to Construction Genius today. Feel free to share the episode with other people who you think would benefit from listening to it, and I will catch you on the next episode.